Hey, I have no idea why I just threw myself here, but cue something interesting.
Lola, she feel like the ocean, like to drink and smoke some Doja. And I feel like smoking, plus she good at charming cobras. I feel like I'm chosen, but she ain't the only one.
First, what you're gonna do is plot summary, a little bit of analysis on what the story's trying to tell, or at least what I think it's trying to tell. And then finally, we're gonna use Ron Mars's 3 points of a successful story. So the story of Descender Volume 2 focuses on two dynamic characters, Andy and Tim-21. Now for Tim-21, the main focus in this volume is his encounter with Tim-22, who was introduced at the end of Volume 1 as a group of android extremists attacked the kingdom of Gnish and introduced Tim-21 to their companion bot Tim-22. And as the story progresses, Tim-21 and Tim-22 exchange thoughts and philosophies on how the world should be. You notice that Tim-21's character develops and changes, becomes a dynamic character, whereas Tim-22 is more of a stationary, non-dynamic character who's mainly portrayed as an antagonist and aggressive. However, a new depiction of Andy, Tim-21's friend, gets introduced. He's introduced as Andy the Scrapper. The distinction between Andy the Scrapper and the childhood Andy is most noticeable in the Descender issue number 7, which is the first issue of Volume 2. He's portrayed as very harsh, aggressive, isolated. Through the images of his face, we see the roughness in his personality. And to contrast his personality, Hickman introduces retrospective images of his childhood when he met Tim-21. Now those images allow us to understand that the theme of time is very important in Andy's character. Now that we know that time and the progression of a character is so important in Andy's development, we can understand that the way he progresses from the beginning of the volume to the end of the volume allow us to see the significance of that character. So now that we know what happens to Andy and Tim-21, what does it all mean? Now that we know that both Andy and Tim-21 are dynamic characters, we can align their stories from the beginning to the ending of the volume next to each other. Now, knowing that they're dynamic characters and they experience a change in personality and how they perceive certain aspects of life, we know that internal conflict happens, because internal conflict is a drive for change. Now, the internal conflict for Andy is, are robots bad or good? However, for Tim-21, it would be, am I bad or good? Since he has a slightly different version of that internal conflict. How are we supposed to answer a question like this? Robots bad or good? If we use Bruno Latour's article, Law of Your Monster, he uses a really big and broad metaphor of Frankenstein and the monster he created. And he keeps on talking and talking and talking and talking and talking. Basically, the article is really long. What he's trying to say is that nature and culture do not go separately. They always go together. Knowing that nature and culture goes together and that actions of one affect the actions of another, we can now answer the question if robots are bad or good. They're neither. They're only as good or as bad as their driving force. Knowing this allows us to move back to our thesis and actually state that technology is only the extension of our intentions. Now for the last part of the video, Ron Mars's 3 points of a successful story: pace, relatability, and ending. For the pace of the story, in my opinion, at least for Andy's character, was really good. For Tim-21, I think it was a lot of the same of him talking to Tim-22 and being on the ship, and not much happened. For the relatability of the story, as a group of android extremists attacked the kingdom of Gnish, the ending of the story I didn't think was that great. The conflict between Tim-21 and Tim-22 is still unresolved. The only thing that resolved was Tim-21's internal conflict, which I think was like the main focus of the whole plot. However, it wasn't that big of a bang and cliffhanger type of ending that I like.